Hello everyone. So this video is going to be dedicated to survival literature. I thought I had made a video about survival literature in the past, but I have not. And what got me thinking about it is somebody I work with named Shannon. She is interested in survival literature as well. So I put together this list for her. Shannon, I hope you find some of these suggestions very useful. First, before we dive in, we should probably talk about how I used criteria to come up with what is survival literature and what isn't. First, the event or person that is the subject of a book has to center on survival. There's lots of interesting people who may find themselves in a life or death situation, once or twice, but if the book doesn't center on that, then it's not survival literature. A significant portion of the book must include life or death events. The third criteria is survival the primary interest of the readers? Is that why this book is being sold? People want to know how you survived a terrible prison camp or a natural disaster or something. And last, the book is considered survival literature by others. So, starting here, and these are in no way, shape, or form in particular order, In the Heart of the Sea, The Tragedy of the Whale Ship Essex. For those of you not in the know, the whale ship Essex and its disaster was the inspiration for Moby Dick. The true story is actually much more horrifying, though, and involves cannibalism. Black Hawk Down. Black Hawk Down is about Operation Gothic Serpent and what's called the Battle of Mogadishu. Essentially, military operation involving various special forces elements got messed up. And this book is essentially just about that day, and I think the whole thing lasted even less than a day. Very good book by Mark Bowden. Lone Survivor. Lone Survivor is about Operation Red Hawk. Without going into all of it, a four-man SEAL team was inserted into the mountains of Afghanistan, and only one made it out alive, rescued. Into the Wild is a book by Jon Krakauer, and this is about a person, a young man, who sometime after he graduated college decided to go into the Alaskan wilderness and sort of see if he had what it took to survive. Very tragic story, very fascinating read, though. Jon Krakauer, great author. I've read almost all of his books. And the thing about this is actually a pretty light read, easy to bust out in a weekend. Into Thin Air, about that disaster that occurred in Everest in the 90s. Jon Krakauer was actually there for that, and he summited Everest that day. He summited it earlier than most people, and that's what saved his life, probably. But when you get into these thin air mountain environments, that we humans just aren't adapted for, death is sort of the inevitable consequence if you can't get out in enough time. You can bring some bottled air up there with you that'll help out, but, you won't last indefinitely. The Perfect Storm. I feel most people are going to actually know what this is about. Of course, it's about the, I don't know, I forget the exact name of the ship, the Adrian Gale or something like that, caught in a very fierce storm. I believe they call the nor'easter, 100-mile-per winds and all that. And it's the story of, of course, of that vessel, but also of the larger culture in general of that area. Kon-Tiki by Thor, and this is a book by an archaeologist who wanted to prove that there was actually passage across the sea from a certain area in South America to some islands. He just wanted to prove if it was possible, and he actually proved it was. This is the classic, man versus nature in the middle of the Pacific on a raft. Alive. This book is 8th on my list, but let's face it, it's number 1 on most people's lists. I don't take the time to order like which is better or worse. This is about a rugby team that was stranded for dead in a plane crash in the Andes. Pretty much regarded by most sources as one of the best survival literature pieces around. Endurance. This is a book about the Endurance, which was stuck in ice, and Ernest Shackleton's heroic attempts to get help. And everyone made it. That's what's actually pretty amazing about all this. Krakatoa. This is about the eruption in Krakatoa. I mean, no more really needs to be said. It also gets into the after effects on that island and ramifications for the colonial government and stuff like that. shadow divers. Just like I said, we aren't adapted to live in the high altitudes of Everest. We are not adapted to be in the deep ocean under 100 feet for a very long period of time. And yet, it says two Americans. Yes, primarily we're talking about the research endeavors of two Americans to identify what specific German U-boat they found sunk off the coast of New Jersey. But there was a lot more people throughout the years, and yes, it took years to identify who this was, or I'm sorry, which vessel this was. At least three people died in that endeavor. So, interesting book. The Age of Scurvy. This is a pretty obvious one. Scurvy was the top killer of sailors at sea. It's brought on by a deficiency of a vitamin. Can't think of which one at a time, but this is first of all how finding out what caused scurvy actually took quite a many years. I mean, we're talking decades, if not over a century. People just thought it was the inevitability of going to sea. Lots of really graphic descriptions of people dying of the disease and people just being in death throes and recovering. Really, really nasty stuff, but also a very quick read that pretty much anybody can knock out in the weekend, if not knock out in a day if you're motivated enough. The Deadliest Sea. Yeah, the sort of motto of the unofficial motto of this list could be the ocean doesn't like you. But this is a book about a Coast Guard operation to rescue people off of a industrial fishing vessel that was going down somewhere in the Bering Straits. The Gift of Fear. I understand that this is a weird one because this gets into what helped people who were facing a survival situation sort of thrive. Essentially, the instincts you have, why you should listen to them, and how even things that maybe seem to act on you on an unconscious level, if you analyze them, you realize you were making conscious decisions. So essentially, and it gets into, hey, it even has survival on the cover. So no, it gets into all the ways we're adapted to survive and things we're able to pick up on. The Lost City of Z, a tale of deadly obsession in the Amazon. This is actually a book about Percy Fawcett and his desire to prove that there was a very ancient civilization in the jungles of South America. Now, although obviously Percy Fawcett is lost, this tale includes the stories of lots of people who went into this part of the jungle and died, or they got out but barely survived. Some of them got out but later died of disease or were in such bad condition. So, really fascinating read about rainforest exploration, or more specifically, why you shouldn't explore the rainforest. Night by Elie Wiesel. This is the story he wrote based off of his own experiences in a concentration camp. Very good read. It says right here he's the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. And yeah, he definitely deserves it. A lot of people don't know this, but his savings were wiped out by Bernie Madoff. And again, this is a book that you can read that is not, very voluminous, can take it in a weekend. Man's Search for Meaning, also about a person put in a death camp, and decided, because he was a student of psychiatry, observed what factors made people survive and what were the absence of those, or what was the presence of some other factors that made people give up hope and just lay down and die. Despite how bad this is one of the most inspirational reads, and I will do the whole, if you're only going to read one book on the list, yeah, okay, I usually don't do that, but if you are just going to read one book on the list, this one. Okay, so, now we've kind of shifted to other facets of World War II, Hiroshima, and that is by John Hersey. This is about the day the atomic bomb was dropped on that city, or more so specifically above that city, and the fallout, both the actual nuclear fallout, obviously, but also the consequences of that. So these next three that I'm going to mention here, starting with this one, they're in that vein of Unbroken. So if you found that a fascinating read, you might also like these next three. So Death March, The Survivors of Bataan. This is basically an oral history book. So it's this guy did a lot of interviews of people who survived that, and this is kind of one long tribute to them. Helmet for My Pillow, sorry. This, of course, is about a Marine and his island hopping campaign in the Pacific during World War II. Another book about the same subject, but written by E.B. Sledge, who was a PhD in English literature. So it's a far larger, much more substantial read than the previous one. Both are very good, though. Hill 488. Okay, so I'm a history buff and I study, Vietnam quite a bit. Hill 488, about a sustained firefight that a recon unit gets into that lasts all night pretty much. When Heaven and Earth Changed Places. This is actually written by a woman who, lived in Vietnam, worked on behalf of the Viet Cong for some time, eventually became an American citizen, though. Very interesting perspective. We get both the Vietnamese perspective, we get the religious perspective, and we, of course, get the female perspective. Though I do have to warn people, I rarely ever believe in anything called trigger warnings. Yeah, I think it's basically a rating system for adults, and I think if you're over 18 and want a rating system, you're pathetic. But I will warn people, graphic torture, graphic rape, and a host of other bad things in this book. On the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This is by Sherry Buchanan, and, on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, The Blood Road, The Women Who Defended It, The Legacy. This book is written as an apolitical travelogue and quite an enjoyable read. It gets into stuff more so on what was happening during the war on the North Vietnamese side, and talks about the females who worked for the NVA, because I guess they had a lot more females working in the North than were working in the South in the war effort. The Bridge at Dong Ha. This is about, in 1972, there was actually an aggressive push by the NVA, it's North Vietnamese Army, and they might have been trying to go for Saigon. And a very brave Marine officer actually climbed under the bridge, sort of like a gymnast, and rigged some explosives and stopped them cold. A very dangerous situation. Thought he might get himself blown up, and it's amazing he didn't. But they blew the bridge, halted the advance, and took 3 years for them to try the advance again. We Were Soldiers Once and Young. This is about the battle of, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but Ia Drang, one of the earlier, more bloody battles of the Vietnamese conflict. Ken Follett, On Wings of Eagles. This is about Ken Follett, great author, wrote 2 very, very good selling books. One of them a spy thriller, I forget its name. The other, Pillars of the Earth, sold. It was huge. It was everywhere for a little while. And it's about the building of a cathedral. But On Wings of Eagles essentially is about a harrowing prison break that 2 Americans make from an Iranian facility. And I'm going to use this word again. Their harrowing flight across the hostile desert to get to freedom. A very, very good book. I just want to mention some booktubers that have, their channels or channels I've watched, or if I don't watch them, they inspired me in some way. Triumphal Reads and Mike's Book Reviews. Most booktubers do fiction. These 2 do nonfiction. Triumphal Reads is mostly nonfiction. And Mike's Book Reviews is mostly fiction with a little nonfiction. SFF 180 reviews sci-fi and fantasy books. I find that I tend to agree with his ratings. The Shades of Orange just does fictional horror, but has read so many books that she's a great subject matter expert. Criminali is, and The Shades of Orange is Canadian, Criminali is UK. This is a fan of horror and pulp. A Book Olive also does some nonfiction reads. Epic Reads is HarperCollins' YouTube channel. They, more than anybody else who's ever tried, has made booktube and book TV a thing. Brandon Sanderson, yeah, he has his own YouTube channel. It's very good, very informative. He's a famous author. Naya reads and smiles. I don't watch her channel that much anymore, but I love the style of book she came up with, where you essentially just sit down, read a book every couple hours, record your thoughts on it, and see how much of it you can get through in a day. And then Ariel Bissett, pretty much her channel is what got me interested in BookTube in the first place. Anyways, she does book videos, but also home improvement stuff. So just want to say thank you. I hope you found this informative.